being quite honest, right now, talking about the death of disease feels a little inappropriate. We're in the middle of a pandemic where a single-stranded piece of RNA encapsulated in a lipid envelope has brought the entire world to a screeching halt. So is this really the time to talk about the possibility of ending all disease? Maybe not, but maybe it's the perfect time, because the COVID-19 crisis is pressure testing everything in society. And maybe we can use this as an opportunity to reevaluate how we currently combat disease and postulate how we could. And I'm thrilled to have two experts with me, Mickey and Sami, to help brainstorm what the death of disease might look like. You guys ready to get into it?
Sure.
Mickey, I'm going to start with you. When we talk about death of disease, to me, actually detecting and diagnosing the correct disease seems like it will be critical. Could you help us understand how diseases are currently diagnosed and how you're seeing that change?
Sure, certainly, and thanks for inviting us to talk about this exciting topic in this very special time. Certainly, knowing what you are facing is a first logical step in trying to treat that disease, and then later on figure out ways to avoid it or to prevent it. And certainly the shift we've seen in multiple fields is from the hypothesis-based testing, so basically a clinician with all their knowledge and education trying to guess at the end of the day what's wrong with the patient given prior exposure and risk factors, etc., and then sending tests that are there to confirm that hypothesis, moving away from this hypothesis binary search methodology into a parallel search, hypothesis-free search, where everything is looked at the same time using advanced genomics and compute tools. We've seen that happen over and over in genetic disorders, then in cancer, and now the evolution that Keris is leading to bringing that field into the infectious disease paradigm.
No, I think that's great, and I agree with you. All this new innovation we're seeing in omics technology is letting us kind of move past sort of stepwise testing to get that system level understanding of what's going on. So Sami, turning to you, let's talk about how we treat disease. We have access to some amazing drugs and treatments out there, but sometimes it's not just drugs you need to actually combat a disease. It's a more holistic approach. Would you be able to sort of elaborate on how you're seeing this evolve, especially in kind of the chronic disease space?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right, especially as it relates to chronic disease. And chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, it's a massive problem. In America alone, it's costing us more than $1 trillion a year, so more than a third of US healthcare costs per year. And so if you think of what do we have to show from the last 3-4 decades of investing very heavily into chronic disease management and care, well, today, more people die because of type 2 diabetes than ever in America. More people die because of cardiovascular disease than ever. So in effect, what we've created is a massive industry that's treating the symptoms of these chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So it doesn't actually make the underlying cause go away. We're just treating symptoms, in most cases, with a lifelong subscription to a pharmaceutical drug. Now, that's probably better than doing nothing, but unfortunately, it's not making the disease go away. And now at the time of COVID-19, we've learned that if you have type 2 diabetes, the poor outcomes, even death from COVID-19, the probability is increased substantially. So I think the killer treatment would be, that's a bad use of words, but the total game changer would be if you could reverse chronic disease. Mm-hmm. If you could actually address the underlying cause of a chronic disease. And that's basically what we've done at Virta Health. So we focused mostly on type 2 diabetes, and now we've been able to show that with a combination of virtual care delivery and, surprise, surprise, individualized nutrition treatments, we've been able to actually reverse late-stage type 2 diabetes and consequently eliminate the need for even drugs like insulin. And this is in not 1% or 5%, but 60% of the patients that we've treated according to our clinical trials. So absolutely, especially if you treat chronic diseases, the pharmaceutical drug to treat symptoms is kind of just one piece of the puzzle. But if you can reverse the disease, that's the ultimate solution.
Yeah, no, I love it. And just sort of picking up upon that, I love the strategy of not just, reversing the disease, but empowering kind of the patient to sort of understand and take, a more holistic view of themselves and kind of putting them in the center stage of managing their own health, empowering them with the tools to do that. I think that's really great. I want, Mickey, maybe you can pick up on something that Sami said. Sure, treating disease is great, reversing disease is great, but if we're really thinking about like the death of disease and eradicating disease, doesn't it logically mean we might want to move towards prevention, and maybe get your thoughts in that space?
Yeah, no, that's really a great point. And the death of disease is a little bit of a utopian view. But before we get there, we can certainly catch the disease earlier and earlier. And across the board, the earlier you can diagnose disease, the better outcomes you have. I don't think there's one example where later diagnosis leads to better outcomes. And the more we can put ourselves ahead of the disease, the more likely we are to help patients. And I'd like to maybe look at that at two different resolutions. One is at the single patient resolution, and the other is at the population health scale. At the single person resolution, it's been shown in many fields, and we've now shown through a clinical study that was published late last year, that using those novel technologies, in our case genomics, you can detect disease much earlier than what existing paradigms can. And in a study in pediatric oncology patients that are unfortunately lost most of the time to infectious diseases, we've shown that we can detect an infection in a patient before they even have any symptoms. So think of it, the patient doesn't even know that they're sick, and a few days later, they become symptomatic, and then in regular course of treatment, they would be running cultures and PCRs and serologies to try and diagnose the patient. We can detect the cause of the disease, the actual pathogen, 3, 5, 7, sometimes 10 days ahead of any symptom arising. So if you could catch the disease before it's even at the symptomatic phase, that's a game changer. And then just moving to the population health, and again, linking it to current days of the pandemic, if we can now take and cross information that's coming from multiple patients across the globe and start seeing of how those diseases, those microbes, evolve in evolutionary landscape or novel diseases that are emerging, we will be in a position to finally get ahead of the next pandemic. And instead of having to treat it when it started, be able to detect it at the very early stages and get ahead of that. So I think those two scales, both of the individual patients, what's happening within a patient, and at the population scale, will really benefit from the transition from binary search to that massively parallel data-driven search.
Yeah, and I mean, the current world is highlighting the need for those types of sort of preventative measures. Imagine we could detect who had COVID-19 before they had symptoms. Think of that would help us in controlling the spread of that, and then translate that to other diseases. Imagine we could tell you were on the path to developing cancer. We have some cases where we've demonstrated this in the realm of type 2 diabetes by identifying prediabetes, but I think we can go even further, and that's where I'd love to sort of see this sort of field move. So, we've talked a lot about different things: diagnosing, treating, reversing, preventing disease. All of this sounds amazing. And I think the good news is, and we can be pretty bullish about, is that we actually have the technology to do a lot of this. Bad news is it seems like it could be a little expensive to me. So, Sami, I wanted to pick your brain because you've got a really interesting idea of who is or who should be paying for some of this new innovative technology.
Yeah, well, it is a good question. And so we took a novel, I guess, many people say novel approach, which to me is a common sense approach to taking VERDA or type 2 diabetes reversal treatment to the market, which is you only pay for results. I think that's how most of the healthcare should be. And so in American landscape, the payers are health plans and employers and government, and everyone is economically and otherwise suffering from the effects of type 2 diabetes. So we go to these payers and say, well, this is clearly a big problem for you. How about we reverse the disease? Now, initial response was rolling eyes then and saying, that sounds too good to be true. There's just no way it's going to work. There's no way that's possible. Nobody has done that at scale for the last 3 decades. So we said, well, what if we put our money where our mouth is, and literally you only pay if we deliver these clinically validated or economically validated results. And so that's the approach we took, which again, people have said it's disruptive and novel. To me, it's just common sense. That's how. Why would you get paid for just churning more transactions or procedures when really the goal of healthcare should be, or the emphasis should be on the first word, which is health, as opposed to just delivering care and transactions. So that's the approach we've used, and it's worked very well. So we now work with the U.S. government, even the Veterans Administration. We work with a number of Native American tribes, nearly 100 different employers, and many large health plans. And this model of pay for results only has certainly made a difficult task slightly easier.
I think that's great, and I do hope that that's the shift we're going to start to see in healthcare more, is more of these value-based contracts or these value-based payment systems, because just getting paid for fee for service, it doesn't incentivize anybody to get the best outcome for the patient, and that's really what we should be using all this technology sort of to do. So I'm glad to see that you guys are really innovators in that space. So as we round out this session, I want to pick up on a phrase that you said, Sami. You said, too good to be true. So death of disease. Is that statement sort of too good to be true? Or maybe I can ask each of you to define, like, what does death of disease mean to you in sort of real life and in practicality? And do you think it's possible? Mickey, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think that death of disease is not practical. It's impossible. This is too good to be true. And I don't know that this is where we would like to go. I think I would settle for constant improvements in how we understand disease and address the next disease that is about to have a massive toll on our health. And to that end, I'm very optimistic with novel technologies and the beginning of a shift in the mindset of how healthcare systems are looking at novel technologies and the pace by which regulators and payers are starting to approve those novelties and technologies. I think there's reason to be optimistic that we'll get ahead of many of the diseases we've been struggling with.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sami, do you want to add?
Yeah, I guess I look somewhat similarly to Mickey, but then in some ways slightly differently, which is, and maybe it's because I'm so focused on chronic diseases. So the way I look at this death of disease is, if we think of why people die in developed nations, and so if we leave the freak accidents out, great majority of us die because of why? Metabolic health issues and chronic diseases. So this is, again, cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. So when I think of death of disease, I think of, oh my God, there's this bundle of diseases that kills us 10, 20, 30, 40 years too soon. And these are all diseases that are either preventable or reversible. So that's kind of the lens through which I look at that. In fact, in many ways, in our fingertips, we already have the tools and the treatments and protocols and approaches to eliminate or at least massively delay, literally death, because of these causes. So I'm actually pretty optimistic that we have sort of 10, 20, 30 years of extended life within our capabilities today.
Oh, I think that's great. I mean, I'll just add my thoughts here. I echo sort of the optimism and kind of the pragmatism. And then I'm going to add maybe a third sort of value is sort of respect for biology. If anything, the current crisis has sort of taught us is that, Mother Nature, is a powerful force. And, in my field, I always get asked, do you think we're going to cure cancer, Liz? And emphatically, I say yes. However, to me, cure means sort of staying one step ahead of the disease so that we can live healthier, longer, and hopefully happier. And so I think sort of diagnosis, treatment, reversal, prevention, all of these are going to be sort of key pillars for us to sort of leapfrog forward towards and maybe aim somewhere near some version of death of disease. Thank you guys all. And that's it.
Thank you.